Alrighty. Awesome. Alrighty. So where we're going to pick up today is on page 17. It's chapter 2, and it is There is a Solution. And what's so exciting about this chapter of the book, at least for me, is it really emphasizes, hey, there is a solution. And we're going to get all into that solution, what it looks like, what it is. And if you've been coming here a little while, you'll know we talk about the solution as being the spiritual awakening that happens as the result of these 12 steps, this course of action. And sometimes you'll go to meetings where people say there is a solution. And what they want to emphasize is that there is one, that we have one solution, that common solution. But I always also want to emphasize that there is a solution. So if we're coming here today, if we're struggling, if we're in a lot of pain, if we don't know whether or not we can stay sober, I just want to emphasize we have a solution. And honestly, that is a message of Depth and Weight. It's not just a, hey, we can go to meetings and just try to manage one day at a time. And of course, we do live one day at a time. But there is a solution that is on offer that is of depth and weight. So getting into the reading, it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. And in that first paragraph, what we're given again is a message of hope. And also what I want to offer is this book. It was written as an experiential book. So what I mean by that is, as an alcoholic, I want to argue. I'm not saying anyone here would. I'm just saying I have a tendency to argue things and be a little adversarial and a little oppositional. I'm sure none of that has come up in any inventory anyone here has ever written, but that's me. And what I found is that there's two things I can't argue with. And what I really ultimately cannot argue with is, what is your experience? I can say I don't like it. I can say it won't happen for me, but I can't argue and say that didn't happen for you. And also what I can't argue with is what is in this book. Again, I can say I don't like it. I can say I don't know if it'll happen for me, but I can't argue it because it is the combined experience of the first 100 members. And ultimately, the more of us who've been able to stay sober, who've had the promised spiritual awakening, who've done this work, that has become more and more of our experience. So not only are we now thousands of men and women who once just as hopeless as Bill, it's in the millions. And so when it says just as hopeless as Bill, that's one of the things when we go through the study, I really want to emphasize. It is from that place of hopelessness that we're able to grab onto that hope that is on offer. And so we go from hopeless to hope. And if I can accept the hopelessness of my condition as an alcoholic, and what that means is to have that mental obsession and to have that physical allergy. If I have a body that reacts to alcohol telling me that I need more, but a mind that tells me to go back to it, I'm in a hopeless dilemma. But it offers hope in the very next sentence saying nearly all have recovered, which is to say to be recovered is a state that we can attain. And that is, again, a message of depth and weight. Recovered does not mean cured, but what recovered means is that the mental obsession has been removed. It has been relieved. And it goes on to say they have solved the drink problem. There's a real answer. There's a real solution. So it says we are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix. And that's one of those lines in the forward to the fourth edition. It talks about how, hey, we set up in the 1930s and it was just a bunch of middle-aged white dudes, but now look at us, right? It doesn't say that verbatim. If you go to the forward to the fourth edition, it says it in different words. But that idea that that has become so much more true. And I come to this meeting, go to your home group, and you'll see a bunch of alcoholics that we probably never would have drank with, we never would have liked. And it says, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. And I can always ask myself, has that been my experience? Again, if it's not my experience yet, stick with us and let us help you find that experience. But I know for me, when I really first started to identify and be like, oh, that's me. Oh, that's me, I drank like that. Oh, that's me, I felt like that. Oh, that's me, I experienced that. but you guys seem to be happy. You guys seem to have something that I don't have. That was a powerful, powerful moment. And it goes on to say we are like, oh, welcome. We're on page 17, second paragraph. So it says, we are like the passengers of a great liner, the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade this vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. And it was one of those things I would read this and I'm like, what are we talking about? Right? Like, what? And what it's referencing is the Titanic disaster. And the book was written in 1938, 1939, published in 39. The Titanic disaster, it crashed in 1912. So if you can imagine any sort of recent, in the last couple decades, and I'm sure you can think of a couple, tragedies that would come almost immediately to mind. And so we're referencing sort of a tragedy that was on sort of the global consciousness, right? People reading this book would know, oh yes, the Titanic. And so what would happen is after the Titanic, the survivors of the Titanic experienced that moment of like, we went through such an ordeal together. We survived this horrific thing. You know, we're gonna be friends. We're gonna stay in contact. We'll have reunions. We'll get back together. But little by slowly drifted apart. And it's kind of an interesting thing because I've seen an interesting parallel between those who go to like a rehabilitation facility where it's that common experience coming together and connecting and like, hey, we have this common thing, our addiction, our alcoholism, and we're going to go camping and we're going to hang out. We're going to be friends and get out of treatment as that slow drifting apart. And when it talks about that democracy from steerage to captain's table, that's a beautiful reference. It's talking about how ultimately alcoholism can affect any group of people, regardless of wealth, regardless of status. Now, the Titanic was an actual disaster, but I'm going to reference the James Cameron movie for a moment. And I will not be singing Celine Dion. And that's my gift to you. But in that movie, if you remember, Jack, he would have been steerage, right? Lower class, poor, Rose, captain's table. And so it's saying alcoholism can affect anyone. But by that same token, anyone can recover from alcoholism. And I will also suggest, if you're having a look for a sex ideal, a relationship ideal, stick around till when we get to that point in the inventory process. Don't use the Titanic. I mean, she was suicidal and engaged, and then he literally died. I'm going to suppose that might not be a healthy relationship ideal. I mean, you take it to your sponsor. I'm not going to dictate, but I'm just throwing it out there. So, so unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would have never held us together as we are now joined. A common peril is a common problem. And if you remember from previous weeks, our common problem is the alcoholism, is the addiction, is that manifestation, which is to say a physical allergy and a mental obsession. And that mental obsession being fueled by that spiritual malady. And sometimes, you know, we go to meetings and we hear we have a common problem, and that's what binds us together, our common problem, our common problem. And yes, we absolutely do have a common problem. But I don't know about you guys, when I would drink and use drugs with people who had that common problem, and only that common problem, we were not bound together in the joyous intimacy or wonderful democracy. We were bound together in a lot of not goodness and trauma and future events. And that just might be my experience. So we do have to come together with that common problem. But deeper than that is what comes in this next paragraph. It says the tremendous fact, not theory, not hope, not wish, and not like, hey, yeah, just a fact. Tremendous, tremendous fact for every one of us, which means that this is not some unattainable thing. This is a reality for those of us who have done this work and who've had this experience, is that we have, every one of us, is that we have discovered a common solution. We're on the very bottom of page 17. Absolutely. And so we have a common solution. And for us, that common solution is that spiritual awakening or that spiritual experience. That's what it is. And then it says we have a way out. A way out was going to be one of the titles of this book. And they sent poor little Fitz Mayo to go to the Library of Congress and to see if they had any, books named The Way Out. There was about 22, and they weren't really keen on using it, so they just set Fitz on this little errand. So we went with Alcoholics Anonymous as the title for this book. We didn't go with The Way Out. But again, that we have a way out, and a way out on which we can absolutely agree. And let's be real, if you go to your home group, we don't always agree on much. And upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. And again, I can make that note that in my book, when we're talking about that action, what we're talking about is the program of action, which is very simply the 12 steps. And the purpose of the 12 steps is to take me from that common problem, from that place of hopelessness, to that place of hope, to that common solution of a spiritual awakening. And it says, this is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. And it really is great news. I say this a lot. I didn't try everything there was to try, but my experience kind of continues to be every single other thing that I try hasn't worked. But this is something that worked and worked at depth. And that has been my experience. And that has been the experience of almost any recovered member that I've come to find and to know. So top of page 18, an illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness. And this is, again, revolutionary news written in 1938, that this is not that you are bad. This is not that you are of weak character. This is not that you are immoral. This is not that you just don't want it enough, that you don't want to quit bad enough. This is that there is an illness which is more powerful than me. And it's kind of revolutionary, the idea that, because I don't know about you, I came to this thing with a lot of shame. I came to this thing with a lot of I'm not a good person. I've done some awful things and I hurt people in ways I don't want to hurt people. And it is saying this is an illness. And we have come to believe it an illness, and it involves those about us in a way that no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. And I can ask myself, is that my experience? As a result of my alcoholism, or, because Big Book Compendium, addiction or manifestation of the disease, has that led to annihilation of all the things that were worthwhile in my life? Have I come to that place? Have I experienced that? And that's a real personal thing. That's a thing that I feel like we don't talk about till we get to the rooms. And when I think of annihilation, I kind of have a lot of visual metaphors in my little brain. And one of them is, if you've ever seen any clips from when they were doing atomic bomb testing, and when they drop the atomic bomb, it just levels everything to the ground. It's completely level. That is what I think of when I think of annihilation, that there is nothing left. It is dust. And then it says it engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. Again, I think of that mushroom cloud expanding out and touching all those who love me or who have come into contact with me, and the amount of pain that I cause. But I'm not a bad person. I don't want to hurt the people that I love. I don't want to do the things that I'm doing, but they are affected. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. Again, I can ask myself, is that my experience? Did I hurt and affect those in ways that I did not want to? We hope this volume will inform and comfort Those who are or who may be affected, there are many. And there's a famous speaker, and it's not good that I can't remember who said this. It was either Clancy I or Sandy B. But one of them said that our job is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable, which I think is a beautiful call, right? And it says highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and doctor. Has that not been my experience when a doctor, when a psychiatrist, when a therapist wants to poke and prod at my drinking, that I got my walls up, that I'm not going to tell them the real number. I'm wanting them to point to something else that's wrong with me. And then when it's family, when it's loved ones, man, do I not flare off? Do I not get reactionary? Do I not tell them to F off and where to go and what to do with it, right? But it goes on to say, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. And what we're talking about here is what my responsibility is. And we're getting into, in certain parts of Canada, Ontario, they'll call this what's coming up, the sponsorship contract. Shout out to Ontario. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is, what is my responsibility? It's talking about my responsibility to the newcomer. It's talking about sponsoring. And it's one of those things that I really want to emphasize and regularly emphasize, that sponsorship is not that like top tier, extra special AA. Like, it's not gold star 12 step. It's a minimum requirement. In fact, it's such a minimum requirement. We're in step one, and we're going to talk about how we show up and work with others, and how we're called to show up and help others. So for those that just joined, glad you're here. We're on page 18. And so, but the ex-problem drinker has found this solution. So that is one of the requirements that I have, that I've found the solution. And if I'm new, and if you're new, if we're struggling, what I want you to know, the solution happens as the result of the 12 steps. So if we haven't had it yet, that is okay. We've just got a little bit of work to do to get there. Who is properly armed with facts about himself. And what does that mean? That means that I can explain from my own experience what the physical allergy looks like, that I can describe from my own experience what that mental obsession looked like for me, that I can describe from my own experience. I find it very useful for my own experience what the spiritual malady looks like when I'm separated from alcohol, when I'm separated from substances. What does that look like? When I'm properly armed with facts about myself, I can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours, which is to say that I have the ability, and I have the gift, and I have the privilege of being able to help other people. I get to reach out to others and help those who nobody else can reach, who nobody else can because nobody else could reach me. It was another alcoholic who was armed with facts about herself, who could share from her own experience what had happened to her, what it was like for her. Man, that is a powerful thing. And this might not, again, if you're new, if we haven't had the experience of working with others, that's okay. But it is a powerful promise that I get to be a small part of somebody else's miracle. Like, it is incredible. But it says, until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. I get to break down those walls, that barriers that we alcoholics have. I get to punch through, not literally, I don't punch anyone, but that metaphorical punching through that denial. Like, that's powerful. And so it says that so again, sponsorship contract, who I am called to be. And again, if I've been through this work, I can ask myself, is this my experience? And if I have not been through this work yet, that is okay. But know that this is who we are called to be, the standard that I am called to live up to. And of course, I fall short. That the man who's making the approach has had the same difficulty. That I've gone through what you've gone through, that I drank or I used in the way that you drank or used, that I've felt the way that you felt, that I've had this same problem. And it says that he obviously knows what he is talking about. Again, from my own experience, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer. And this is something I really reference a lot because I don't do a lot of yelling with my sponsees. We hope that it's not my job to yell and be like, listen, I got this thing in hardcover, so I could beat you into a state of reasonableness. I don't need to hit anyone, but it is my deportment that does the shouting. Like, I'm not going to yell. That who I am and how I carry myself and the way in which I live my life, that is what shouts that, hey, there's a real answer here. That there's that indescribable light where it's like, man, I can see that that person has it. I can't deny that a change has not happened to them. That is my responsibility. And so when I see the daily actions of the steps that I have to take, or I have those amends that I don't want to make, or I have that inventory I don't want to write, or that fifth step I don't want to do, that when I do those things, of course, I'm doing it so I get the gift of sobriety. I'm doing it so I get the gift of the spiritual awakening. And I'm doing it so I get to know this loving, powerful God that I don't know or believe in when I get here. But I'm also doing it so I can offer this way of life to you, to the people who are before me who could use my help. That is my responsibility. And that changes how I approach these spiritual actions. It goes from I have to I get to. That he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except a sincere desire to be helpful. It's important for me to remember that we're shoulder to shoulder in this journey, that I'm not better than my sponsees, or I'm not any less than my sponsor. Ideally, my sponsor is somebody who's just gone down the path a little bit longer, who has a little more experience to show. But true humility for me is to know that I'm not better than you and that I'm not worse than you, but for somebody of my type, that I'm fully dependent and reliant upon God. What's kind of cool is we get to expand on that when we get to the traditions. I've been working with some people in traditions lately and having a lot of fun with it. So no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except a sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay. Keep in mind, in 1938, published 1939, drunks, helping other drunks for free? Girl, we just came out of a Great Depression. In fact, it was such a depression, we called it the Great One. You know what I mean? And these drunks are going to help other drunks for free? Like, and I know it's kind of obvious that, you know, you work with your sponsor, there's not an invoice coming in the mail. There's not, you know what I mean? You don't have to e-transfer or figure out PayPal or Venmo them or anything like that, that it's free. It's so obvious because it's so true. But in 1939, when this book was published, that was a revolutionary idea. For free. No axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. And that's a metaphor. And that metaphor, I'm sure there's a number of meanings that come from that metaphor of taking up their beds and walking again. It was a reference to a story where there's that healing waters, and that there was a man who couldn't get himself into the water because of his physical disability, but was healed through faith. And so the metaphor, at least what I take from that, is those who are least likely and least able to be healed. After that approach, those who are least likely to get back on their feet, to be restored to wholeness, are the ones that are being restored. And it goes on to say, none of us makes a sole vocation of this work, which is to say, it's okay if you have hobbies. A vocation is what we do for work. A vocation is what our job is, what we're paid to do. And so it's saying, like, we don't do this as a living, and we don't do this as our only thing. And it says, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. And I think that's an important line. I don't know about you, but like when I have people that would sit down and give me their time and go through the book with me and share with me their experience, and I'd be like, oh, what's in it for you? And they're like, no, it's helping me more than it's helping you. One, I do not believe you. Not even a little bit. You don't believe it until you start working with others. At least that's been my experience. But like how I like to sponsor, how I like to work with my sponsees is to go through the book line by line. and to work with them an hour or two every day to get through this work quite quickly, but also to help them be armed with those facts, to be able to put this book and understand this book and relate it to their own experience. And it's a lot of work. But could you imagine if I was charging money? You know what I mean? You want to meet for how long? Every day? Girl, it's the gas prices, isn't it? You just try to fill up the gas tank. I don't drive, so it's not it. But I want to help because I need to help, because my life depends on it. And there's something about that sincerity of motive that is so pure. And that, again, opens us up. And it says, we feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. So in this part of the book, what we're talking about is step 12, in step 1, and the spiritual awakening we have to have, and working with others. And, you know, what we're really going to emphasize in part of this chapter, but far more in more about alcoholism, is the power of the mental obsession. And I know that elimination of my drinking, of course, I have to get to a place of sobriety. But sobriety in and of itself is not enough. And we know that to be true because any of us who've had experience with relapse know that sobriety is actually an incredibly painful state. And I can't hold on to it for very long. I inevitably fall into relapse. So sobriety is not a solution to alcoholism. Sobriety is important. I do need to get there. Make no mistake about that. But it is the starting point. It is the starting. I've got to build and grow from there. So it says a much more important demonstration. Oh man, that's another verb. That means I got to do it. That means I've got to demonstrate. That means I have to live this way of life. Okay, but where? It's not going to be anywhere too tricky or any too difficult that I've got to demonstrate this thing, right? Of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. Oh man! That's pretty much everywhere. And I don't know about you, but when I come to inventory, isn't it usually I've got some resentments and some fears and some conduct about my respective home, occupation, and affairs? You know what I mean? I mean, what else is there in inventory? Yeah, and that's where I need to practice these spiritual principles. It says all of us spend much, and I really want to emphasize all, and I want to emphasize much. So all of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort with which we are going to describe. And what we're talking about here is 12-step work. So again, if there's any theme that we're going to pick up from the session today, it's if I want to stay well, I have to work with others. I have to sponsor others. All of the first 100 members, all of those who have experienced that type of sobriety, all of them spent much of their spare time. I don't have to have all of it. You can take up hobbies. You can do diamond art or windsurfing or whatever you want, but much. You can tell I don't have a lot of hobbies because I'm like, I don't know what hobbies look like. All of us spend much of our spare time, not all our time, but much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe, which is to say, working with others, sponsoring, carrying this message. And it says a few are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all their time to the work, which is, I mean, like I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of physical health problems. I know that's a weird sentence, but what that means, I'm fortunate enough to be super disabled. But what that means is I've got a lot of spare time to spend with working with others. And that really is a gift. And it's an interesting thing. The more that I work with others, the better I do. And the more I come off the gas with that, the worse I do. And I wish I had more time to binge Netflix. But that's just, I'm real sick, guys. I need to work with lots of drunks. So it says, if we keep on the way we're going, there's little doubt that much good will result. So one alcoholic working with another, those early days of AA as they wrote this book. But the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. I mean, if I didn't live in Akron, Ohio or New York City, I might not find this thing. And it says those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so freely given us? How then shall we preserve the message that has allowed us to have freedom? This book, that's what we're going to talk about, this book. It says, we have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. Again, the book. We shall bring to the task our combined experience and knowledge. And so again, like, to be honest, it was primarily Bill Wilson who dictated the writing of the book to Ruth Hawk, the secretary who would type it out. But again, there were people who, like Fitz and Hank, who offered their suggestions, and more, as more and more people apply these 12 steps in this way of life, this becomes the experience, not just of the first 100 members, but the experience of millions who have recovered in Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step fellowships following these directions. So again, if I'm like, I don't like something in this book, that's cool, but I cannot argue it does not work. I don't have to like it, but I can't argue with it, despite my proclivity to try. And so again, when they decided to write this book, a lot of the purpose of it was to not lose the message. If you've ever played that game, like in elementary school or kindergarten, where you, I think in North America, we call it the telephone game, where somebody says, a sentence and you whisper it to the next person who whispers it to the next person who whispers it to the next person. It goes around the room and it's a completely different sentence. That is one of the purposes of this book, is to avoid that. And so it says, of necessity, there will have to be discussion of matters, medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. We are aware that these matters are from their very nature controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve that ideal. Most of us sense that a real tolerance for other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. No, I just kind of want to say something about that. It's one of those lines that's felt more and more and more true. We'll see in the third step that we're going to make a decision, and it's going to be it's not going to be like, it's kind of a big one, but we're going to make this decision, and this decision is going to change how, if we follow up that decision with action, how we orientate to God, to the world around us, like into our fellows. It's going to change that orientation, and our call is to be of use and to be of help. And so for me, knowing that I'm a deeply flawed and frequently wrong human being, that feels like an ideal to live up to. That real tolerance for the shortcomings of others, for their viewpoints, and a genuine respect for their opinions. And that is an attitude which makes me of greater use. And I want you to know, I could not do that even a little bit without any help, like God. I need God. That is clearly a God thing, because I could be judgmental, right? Now, this line on the top of page 20, I mean, it's something worth highlighting, stars beside, underline. If you want to draw in your book a unicorn, here's where you draw it. Like right here, this is vital. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. It's as clear and simple as you could put it. My life depends on working with others, on helping others and helping them find this solution. I got to work with others. It goes on to say, you may have already asked yourselves why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered, there's the hope, from a hopeless condition of mind and body. And again, when we talk about that hopeless condition of mind, we're talking about that mental obsession, that insane thought that takes me back time and time again to that first drink. And that hopeless condition of body is that physical allergy. When I take that drink, when I take that drug, when I take that substance or engage in that behavior, and it flares off, and I need more, and I need more, and I need more. That's what we're talking about. And it says, if you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? Which is going to be annoying because this is, for sure, sees a program of action. There's a whole lot of doing. I was kind of hoping there wouldn't be a whole lot of doing. Turns out a lot of doing. But the good news is this. It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. So again, the whole purpose of this book is to very specifically tell me what I need to do in order to experience freedom from my alcoholism. What do I need to do in order to be recovered? What actions do I need to do to experience the spiritual awakening? It's going to tell me very specifically how to take the actions of the steps. That's why when I work with sponsees or obviously do big book studies like this one, I like going line by line because I don't want to miss anything because there are precise directions. And I love this. It says, we shall tell you what we have done. This isn't some professor sitting in a lofty ivory tower telling you what we think good best practices are. No. This is a drunk who has done this work and had this experience. And again, there's something disarming about, I've felt the way that you felt. I've done what you've done. I've experienced what you've experienced, and there is a way out. Let me show you how. And I always emphasize with my sponsees when we're sitting down, I'm not, by and large, I'm not ever going to ask you to do something I haven't done. I mean, like if they have diabetes, please take care of it. I'm not a diabetic. You know what I mean? But like in terms of spiritual actions, I'm taking those spiritual actions. We're shoulder to shoulder in this thing, and I'm just showing you how they worked with me. So it says, before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. How many times have people said to us, I can take it or leave it alone. Why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again, it would kill him. But there he is, all lit up again. Now, these are commonplace observations on drinkers, which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. And again, I can ask myself, like, have I heard these things? Have people in my life told me, you know, Paige, give your head a shake. Come on, Paige, don't you care that you're hurting us? Paige, don't you care what you're doing? Don't you want to fix this relationship? The doctor told you not to drink, right? And how many times have I ever said that to myself, right? Non-alcoholic people don't have an understanding of what alcoholism is, but it's also my experience that I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I would show up with that condemnation and that judgment and that shame. And it, again, comes from misunderstanding what is wrong with me. And there's times I can show up and even show up in sponsorship with a misunderstanding. How many times have we heard where it's like, well, somebody relapses, like, why didn't you call first? Or, you know, something like that, where it's like, man, they didn't have the power of choice. See, that's the thing, is this disease is way more powerful than me. I do not have the ability, and we're going to get to it on page 24, to see that I can't think my way through this thing. I need to surrender and take actions and allow God to work. But man, I came here with a lot of shame, and I came here with a lot of I'm broken. And what a relief to know that I am ill, that I'm not bad, that there is something wrong with me at that level. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to describe 3 different types of drinkers. And we're going to see what a real alcoholic looks like. And this can be very important for diagnosing ourselves. So it says, Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have a good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. That is, those non-alcoholics, moderate drinkers, they don't have an allergy and they absolutely do not have the mental obsession. They take a drink and I don't know what happens, but I'm assuming it's kind of nothing. You know what I mean? They can take it, they can leave it alone. It's kind of how I engage with pop or soda or Coca-Cola or whatever it's called, wherever you live in the world. I don't drink a lot of pop. I don't buy it. But if I'm out in a restaurant, you know, I'll take a Coke or Pepsi or whatever. Yeah. I can take it. I can leave it alone. If somebody said, Paige, you're going to be on this round of antibiotics, you can't have any Coca-Cola or any Pepsi or any pop of any sort, I'd be like, cool, that's not a problem, right? Take it, leave it alone. And that's my, like, a completely normal relation to it. So a moderate drinker, a normal drinker. And that's what normal drinkers are like, right? They just, it does nothing to them. It does nothing for them. If they got to put it down, they could put it down. Of course, my health, my family, that comes first. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. So it can cause physical symptoms. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. Now it says, if a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So what it's saying is a hard drinker, if given a good enough reason, can either put down the drink and not pick it up again, or begin to moderate their consumption of alcohol or substances or whatever the addictive behavior is. So if given a good enough reason, they can put it down. And I can ask myself in my life, have any of the reasons that I have had, now I know if I'm an alcoholic, none of them worked, but would they have been sufficiently strong enough for somebody else, right? Did I ever have the threat of losing a relationship or losing a relationship or kids or loved ones? Or did I try these different things to quit and to stop and it did not work? Right? Did I try going to rehab? See, if I'm a bit of a hard drinker, going to rehab by itself will be enough. So I'm going to stop drinking and I'm going to work on some of the stuff in me and I'm going to feel better and be okay. And I don't need to drink again and I don't need to pick up again and I'm good. But if I've relapsed and relapsed and relapsed and relapsed, that is not something that's just diagnostic criteria. What that means is I'm probably not a hard drinker. What that means is that I'm probably an alcoholic and that my attempts to try to control and manage my drinking, welcome, we're on page 21, it's good to see you. My attempts to try to control and manage my drinking and their failure is a good indication what I have is alcoholism. And that's good news. I mean, it's not great news because it is like a seemingly hopeless condition of mind and body. It is like a progressive, fatal, incurable disease. Like, so it's not like great news. But the good news is we have a solution. That's the good news. So if we know what it is, we can treat it. So if it's alcoholism, we can treat it. So it says, what about the real alcoholic? So now what we're going to do is describe what it looks like for the real alcoholic. And this is important. It says he may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. So a lot of, not myself. I mean, for me, as soon as I started to drink, I had absolutely no control over the amount that I took. My experiences, I started drinking and the allergy absolutely kicked off right away. But I work with people who their experience was exactly this. They had some time where they're able to have a little bit of control and they were able to put it down for a little while. And they felt like, no, there was a time in my life where I might have been a moderate drinker. And it says, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. A couple things. As an alcoholic, I always want to think of the exception to the rule as the rule. So what we're talking about right there, when that loss of control, whenever we see loss of control, that's the allergy. So we can make a little note that what we're talking about is the allergy. Once I start to drink, it's my experience that I lose all control of my liquor consumption. That when I drink, I need more, and then I need more, and then I need more, and then I need more, and I can't effing stop. Is that my experience? And if that's my experience, it's a good indication that I might be a real alcoholic if I have the allergy. But there's this thing when we talk about the allergy that I think a lot of us do, is we think about that time. Like, listen, back in 04, I went out and I had 3 drinks and I put it down, and I don't know if I'm an alcoholic. Or this, this one time at Christmas dinner, I was able to have a glass of wine and I didn't get absolutely hammered, right? But I'm always looking for the exception, not the rule. And so if you ask a non-alcoholic, hey, do you remember those times where you went to go for a drink and you had 3 drinks and then you went home by 9 o'clock and your pants were dry? They would be like, every time? Like their sort of abnormal experience would be like the one time they overdrank, you know what I mean? And so I am looking for the exception. And for a lot of us, not myself, but for a lot of us, it's a little like playing Russian roulette, with the allergy. So when we start, for those who start off as a moderate drinker and then get into hard drinking and then the real alcoholic, those who progress in that way, it's a little like that Russian roulette. And each bullet is like the physical allergy. And I have to remember that every time I drank, I didn't think what was going to happen was going to happen. But I had no ability to stop what was going to happen from what was going to happen. As soon as I drank, it took me, and I did not know whether or not I'd be able to stop at 3, which rarely happened, or whether I'd keep going for quite a while, right? And it says, here is the fellow who had been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. Again, whenever we see control, we can think the physical allergy. He does absurd, incredible, and it's a little more like the Incredible Hulk, which is incredibly destructive, rather than incredible, like, wow, you're doing great. Incredible, tragic things while drinking. Is that my experience? And again, why would it be my experience? Because I have an allergy, because I'm unable to control the amount that I take. It says he is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And so what's great about that story is it's a beautiful metaphor for alcoholism, and it truly is. So Dr. Jekyll, and I'm just going to do a very brief summary. Dr. Jekyll, he created this potion, this mythical, magical, scientific potion. And he takes this potion and it utterly transforms him into this beast, this Mr. Hyde. Keep in mind, it feels good at first. But then as a result of that potion, he goes out and he destroys the city and he hurts people and he's tearing out lampposts and just creating chaos and damage, right? And if we look at Dr. Jekyll, what is his problem? His real problem is not that he has this potion that turns him into Mr. Hyde. His real problem is Dr. Jekyll, is that he cannot stop himself from taking that potion. No matter how much he needs to, no matter how much he wants to, he goes back to it time and time again. And Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, it was a story that was written very literally as an allegory or metaphor for Dr. Robert Louis Stevenson. He was the author, his alcoholism. And I'm going to tie this into the work that we do. But one of the little random fun facts that I have is Dr. Robert Louis Stevenson, his grandfather designed lighthouses. This won't keep you sober. This is just a fun fact. And his grandfather designed every single lighthouse in Scotland was designed by Dr. Robert Louis Stevenson's grandfather. And I just think that that's a beautiful metaphor. And it ties into what we read so far when it talks about how my deportment shouts. I'm not meant to chase after you. And of course, I want to make sure my hand's out and I want to reach out. But my job is to get so filled up with that light that it pours out, so that you can see where safe harbor is. That becomes my responsibility. So yeah, we're at the lighthouse metaphor portion of the Big Book study. So he is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. I always want to make that note when drinking. When drinking is my experience that I am rarely mildly intoxicated, is my experience when drinking that I am always more or less insanely drunk. Is that my experience? His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature, but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. Is that not my experience? And then this is kind of a funny story. I was doing it's a meeting that's styled as the first half is a big book study, the second half is open shares, and I was helping to facilitate this meeting. And this is just one of those things where there was not the gift of identification. So we get to this point in the book, and I'm explaining, like, yeah, here's my experience. This one time, you know, I went to the liquor store and I got a 2 liter of Axe Head. You might not have Axe Head. Think Colt 45 or like a 2 liter of some real cheap malt liquor, because I'm a lady. And I drank that. And I want you to know that I drank all of it and it was empty. And I'm in the parking lot of this liquor store because, you know, I hadn't made it too far. And I'm trying to break the bottle so I can get glass to self-harm with. And that was the first time I'd shared anything in meeting. And there was absolutely no looks of identification. It was a lot of like, oh, we do not relate. But again, just that idea that like I do things while drinking that I would absolutely never do while sober. And might also horrify a group of alcoholics. So, you know, that's just me. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. Hey, have I not had that experience? Where it's, if I just stay sober, the charges will be dropped. If I just stay sober, I'll get custody. If I just stay sober, I'll get that job. Or if I just don't get absolutely hammered the night before, everything will be okay. Everything will work out. And did I have that experience time and time and time again where my brain told me this time will be different? And I drink again. And off I go. And I mess it up and I ruin it again. Despite every indication that for me to drink before that event, I'm not going to make it, or I'm going to show up so drunk, I'm going to ruin the whole thing. Is that my experience? So it says he is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor. But in that respect, he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. Again, what is my experience with that, right? Like in many areas of my life, I had a great capacity for willpower. This is a long time ago, but I was incredibly athletic, and it takes willpower and effort to go on runs every day and to do weight training every day and to do those things to maintain that routine. That takes willpower. And yet when it came to the first drink and when it came to not picking up, I had none. And it was baffling. And I was not a stupid person. Like I had the capacity to study and to do well at exams. And just one of my examples of getting tight at exactly the wrong moment was I was doing academic upgrading and I was taking a math class, and turns out I was good at math. That was a surprise. And my average was like 90s, 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 90s. And the night before a midterm exam, that there were some sleeping pills that I used to, alcoholic enhancers, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? You just take them, you fight the sleep, and off you go. Woo, good times. One of those. And I took them with the best indication of just going to sleep and having a good night's rest and being well rested for my midterm exam. And to look, that seems like a logical thing. That seems like a rational thing. Paige, that seems like a reasonable thing. I want to do well at this exam. I don't want to mess it up. And but if you knew how I interacted with that medication before, you'd be like, girl, no, no, do not take them, right? And I take them, and that allergy kicks off for me, and I'm showing up doing the one eye at the exam, and my grade just whoop, it's like 90, 90, 90, 60, and back up. But that's the thing, is I had the capacity to study, I had the capacity to learn, I had willpower. But when it came to not taking that first drink, not taking that first drug, not engaging in that addictive behavior, I had no power. And I always like this, because this is one of the few places in the book we get one of those unearned compliments. It's like, he often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes. Why, thank you. And has a promising career ahead of him. I also want you to know I don't relate to that even a little bit, but we'll take the compliment. Thank you. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. It's not my experience that I would rebuild it and rebuild it and rebuild it and tear it down again and again and again. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early the next morning, he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. Again, a sign of the allergy. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. Did I have hiding places? And I think the only times I didn't have hiding places is when I, wasn't in a house, is when I was homeless and I didn't have places I could hide it, right? And I lived with an alcoholic, and that was very important for me to hide the alcohol from the alcoholic, so that he wouldn't get my alcohol, because this alcoholic needed it. I didn't think I had the problem. I thought it was him. Nope, it's me. So as matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can get to work. Then comes the day he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine, or oftentimes we're detoxed with benzodiazepines, right? Or some sedative with which to taper off. He then begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums, read detoxes, treatment centers, sober living houses, emergency rooms, psych wards. Is that my experience? And again, we see the progressive nature of this thing. And it says, and we're going to wrap up after this little paragraph. It says, this is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behavior patterns vary. But this description should identify him roughly. When I work with sponsees, I'm like, hey, do you feel roughly identified, right? And ideally, if I feel roughly identified, that probably means I'm an alcoholic. And again, what makes an alcoholic is lack of control when drinking and lack of choice. When I say I don't want to drink again, do I go back to it? Do I have that mental obsession? So we'll leave it there and pick up at the same spot again next week.